Alright, this is a video on how to do custom Dota IMBA heroes. We're not doing lazy edits, we're doing our own custom, full-on reigns, how to do it hero. And by the I'm filming this all in one take, so I'm sorry if it's a little bit slower, less to the point to the other ones. But first of all, before I get into this at all, I have to say this is not going to be like my other videos because I cannot teach you everything. This is a subject, this is a thing that you would need to do that is so much more far open-ended than just editing around an already existing hero. That's easy. This is you actually have to know how to code to some degree. You have to have a much better understanding of how the game, the inner machinations of the game works. And it is not well documented. You will get stuck on something. People who have been doing this for a long time get stuck on something. This isn't easy. Even if you're really good at it, it's not easy. So it might be frustrating. I'm sorry, and I cannot teach you everything to not make it frustrating. But what I can do is I can give you a brief overview of how it works, the kind of stuff you might have to do, and I'll give you some tips on how to make it easy to figure out what's going wrong. Anyway, this video is going to have three parts. One, the files you need to touch or mess with in order to make a custom hero, just kind of giving you the lay of the land of everywhere you might need to go in the files. Two, some tips and tricks for figuring stuff out on your own because that's where you're going to save a lot of time on this. And you're going to avoid getting stuck on things. And then third, just a really quick example of doing it ourselves. It's not going to probably involve half the types of things you wanted to do for your custom hero, but it will at least show you the kind of from start to end and how it works. Okay, so these files, what files we need to look at and what do they do? Really quick, if you go to game, go to add-ons, go to IMBA scripts, the files you're going to need to mess with to create your hero are a hero list.txt. We looked at that last time in the last tutorial. You just add a 1 next to the name of your hero to enable them. Next, hero underscore custom.txt to show you how this works really quick. Here is that you make some entry, what you've called the hero. It's going to be the same name you gave the hero, I believe, in the hero list. No, it's not actually. But this is the name of the hero you've got, and the way FireToad does it is he overrides the hero right here, which means if you had none of this, it would just be like the vanilla hero. But these are the aspects you change about the hero. And for now, what I want to show you is that when you give the hero an ability, you list the name of that ability right here. So actually making the custom hero is super easy. It's the custom spells which are difficult to make. That's abilities. Like basically 99% of creating the hero is writing their abilities. So how do you write these abilities? That is in the NPC abilities custom file. And how that works is you see how we wrote ability 1 is to Imba, Nyx, Assassin, Impale. That's the name we gave it. Well, if you go here and you search for that, here it is. That's the name you see here, which you can list anywhere as long as it's got the same name. And then you would go in, and there's a big wall of stuff you can write here to describe and go into the details of the spell. We'll go into that as we step through our example of what we're making, but know that that's here. And then the final part is 95% of what you're going to do is going to have to use a Lua file, which is like actual coding, not just a text file that lists some values. And to show you, for now, to show you, this is how it's linked. There'll be a part in the code that says run script, and it'll ask for the script file. You'll give the name of the file and ask for what function we're using in that file to do this part of the code, and that'll be right here. And you can look, here's this file we made. The way he does his Lua files for heroes is he puts it in vscripts hero, and he does hero underscore the name of the hero.lua. So this is hero underscore nyx underscore assassin.lua. And then you can see this is right here. Here's the Lua code. And for that function, here's Impale. So those are the files you need to mess with. The only last two exceptions are if you have your own custom sounds and you have your own custom particles that are involved with it, you would put them in not the game Dota add-ons Dota IMBA, but this is when you go instead to the content folder right here, Dota add-ons Dota IMBA. And then, for example, this is where we keep their sound events, I actually don't know how the sound events work. I'll have to look into that. But for example, this is he sounds associated with heroes that he's going to want to have to look up at some point. He keeps in sounds hero, um, and then he makes folders of the name of the heroes. Like if you want to go to Faceless Void, I don't know if you guys can hear my desktop sound. I really hope you can. Nope, let's keep it, and then later on you could like reference that here. So if those are the files you need to touch. The last exception would be there are some global IMBA files, but I mean it's like files that handle the overall game's logic that you might need to mess with in order to get your hero to work. Some examples are Techie's mines, like when Techie's dies, he throws his mines all over the ground, or how his mines interact with I guess the map timer. I didn't look at it specifically, but they needed to have some of the mind logic in this events.lua. Or another thing is Wraith King's reincarnation, since the way that works is your character dies, and then you need to check if like did they have reincarnation buff? If so, reincarnate them. That's not something you can do from the skill. That's something that like you can only check if someone died by like looking at the game's hero on character die function. So when there's some stuff like that, you'll have to touch the game's overall code, which is you avoid that as much as you can because you want to keep stuff isolated to your own little files, but you might have to do that sometimes. Anyways, enough about the files. Tips and tricks on how to knock out stuff, learn it quickly. So first of all, I put a picture of Cookie Monster here because the phrase I was going to use is I can't teach you how to bake all 200 different types of cookies, but I can tell you how to skim the cookbook for the important shit, right? I'm going to teach you how to just learn the stuff you need to learn. And neither of these links are correct, but we're going to use them anyway. The first one is this is a link to the Dota 2 scripting API site, which, whoops, getting ahead of ourselves. I've got that pulled up here. This is just like a giant, frustrating to read glossary of the types of stuff you would need to do, or all the different functions you might use within your Lua code. This is, I think, specific to Lua. So mainly the reason you do this is like, let's say you know you needed to use a function, but you didn't quite know how it worked, or like you wanted to do something, but you don't know if there was a function to do that. This is where you would look it up. So like, let's say I'm looking through Nix's code and I'm looking at what Firetoad has already put, and I see he uses this thing called create timer. And I'm like, create timer? What does that do? Or I mean, what is like the input output of that? Well, you could do Control F, look up create timer, and that's not there. An example of how frustrating this is. Maybe that's something he defined on his own. Okay, let's look instead. Get level special value for? Perhaps that's defined here. Yes, there it is. Get level special value for. It returns a table, it takes a string and an integer, and then if you want to know, sometimes there's a description. In this case, there isn't. And if you want to know more information, you can click on the link and open this, and this has got jack shit. Welcome to the API in a nutshell. But this at least will have probably some information on everything you try to work with. Now, the more pragmatic link that is going to have, it's not going to be as expansive, but it's going to have really good to the point information, is this moddota.com. There's this guy called Noya who makes these freaking awesome tutorials, and it's going to cover like 99% of the stuff you want to do. Specifically, these two links right here are the ones you want to look at. Data-driven ability breakdown, data-driven events and modifiers. So, because as I said, making a custom hero is all about making custom abilities. It's all in the abilities. And this is going to discuss this. Honestly, if you just read this and closed this video, you'd probably be pretty damn good off. But it's a really long read, so this goes over a lot of specifics, gives some tutorials, yada yada yada. And then, so yes, those are the two resources that are great. Honorable mention goes out to Pizza Lol's spell library. That basically, you know how like when you make a custom file, you've got your stuff you put in those text files, when you've also got to do some Lua files, and you don't ever get to see the Lua files of the base game. Well, what Pizza Lol did here is he tended to recreate like what the Lua files would be for some of these spells, just in case you did want to like take a vanilla spell and then add some stuff onto it that you could only do by making it custom. I guess that's a little weird to understand. But for example, like Lich, Chain Frost, there what you can't look for the Lua file of the vanilla Chain Frost, but looks like man Noya gets around. Looks like Noya was the one who wrote this, and they basically rewrote like how Chain Frost would work if you had to write it in Lua. And this is just it saves you a lot of time because like if you want to do a spell similar to Chain Frost, you can look at Chain Frost. You can look at how they did it here. You can look at what functions they used, or if you just like wanted to make Chain Frost or something, you could look here. This is great because this segues into our next point. The best way to figure out how to do something specifically is see if someone's already done it for something else. If you're trying to figure something else out, chances are someone else has already done the hard work of figuring it out. Like, look, here's Firetoad. He spent all his time writing Dota IMBA. He put a lot of work into it, and he probably was really frustrated figuring out a bunch of really frustrated shit. Here's me. I sat here. I copied his code. I changed two words around. I added one line, and voila, there's fucking Lincoln's. It's working. Great, huh? Give you an example. Let's say you're making Lich's Chain Frost, and you're like, I've got most of it written, but I'm at the part where I need to figure out how an area of effect works, and I have no idea, or I need to look for units in an AoE. The Lich Chain Frost hit the first target, and now I need to write code to see is there another unit around me that I can bounce it to. I have no idea how to do that in Lua. And then Lua said, well, what other spell in Dota Imba, or even just Dota, needs to do that? Sven's Stormbolt. Stormbolt stuns heroes in an AoE, not just the target you hit. So go to Sven's IMBA code and look for the part where it does that, and you can just kind of figure that out. So, for example, here's the code right here. It does find units in radius, yada yada yada. Look at other code, save you a lot of time. Okay, so third and final part, coding our own hero. I'm actually going to code my own hero. I'm lazy and short on time, so instead, we're going to step through how Faceless Void was coded. We're going to show the process from start to finish, how he was added into the game as an IMBA hero, and show what things needed to be done. So the first part, when we go back on like files we talked about, we needed to set hero list, the Faceless Void to 1, and heroes custom. I'll actually show you this specifically. We needed to, here's custom.text right here. We needed to add NPC IMBA Hero Faceless Void. This name, I guess you can put it as whatever you want, as long as it's consistent everywhere else you reference him. And now I'm going into the nitty gritty of this. The way heroes are done, custom IMBA heroes are done, is they override the hero, which I may have mentioned this already, but yeah, it's like if I just left it like that, it would just be vanilla Faceless Void. But this instead takes all those values and changes them to be what your custom values are instead. And there's a lot of different things you can add here, but I'm not going to list them all. If you want to know what things are possible, you can look through this file yourself. You can look through the two links I showed you earlier, yada yada. But for example, it says ability layout 5. That means Faceless Void has 5 abilities that you can see on his like little spell menu. The fifth one that wasn't there normally being his Time Lord passive. And then this here is where you would actually define what those abilities are. And you see he's got 6 abilities. So there's a 6th ability you don't get to see, which is his bonus agility. He gets a bit more agility than normal. And just to show you some other things you can potentially do, like, look, Invoker has his minimum and max 17, really? His minimum maximum damage change, his base ent is buffed, Jahiro's attack range, projectile speeds, lots of stuff you can do. You can look through this. But, and then now, I guess this segues into our next part, because as I said, the meat of writing the hero is in writing the abilities. When it comes to abilities, there are, I don't even know why I'm pulling up the slide to show this. There are 2 ways you can code an ability. There's the way that it is currently done in Dota IMBA, which is straight to the point, kind of lazy, but it's also limited in how you do it, called data-driven. And the best way to describe this is that you do as much as you can in the custom ability.txt file, and you like only use Lua when you absolutely need to. And this isn't just like a principle, this is a specific implementation. It's called data-driven ability. You write that down somewhere in the custom text file. And I'll show you how this is done, but this this is basically just a lot of work on the text file, a little bit of work on the Lua files. And then the second way to do it is called the Lua ability file. It's the opposite. You do some stuff in the custom abilities file, but you define it as a Lua ability, and you just throw it in an entire Lua file, and then you can do so much more in that file than you could normally with the other one. But it's more work, and I know specifically one of the things this is good for is you can override functions, which if you didn't know what that means is like abilities on their own will have some function attached to it, like on spell start or on spell end. Like you never even had to define that; it was just there by default. You can in here define on spell start, on spell end. If you give it the same name, that function will happen when the original one would have happened. So you can kind of like latch on to those things and write code for that, which you cannot do in data driven. Anyways, so for example, I'm going to show you how his time walk is written as a data driven ability. So if we go to this abilities custom file, we'll go to time walk. Here it is. So IMBA Faceless Void Time Walk. It was given the same name as we've got here in the Heroes custom file. Whew, okay, sorry for the bad cuts, but so I don't want to go through like all of this in detail, but I just want to show you kind of the interesting, noteworthy parts of this. So as you're looking through this, had the same name as mentioned before. Base class, ability data driven. This is where it's defined whether or not you're doing a data driven or like a ability Lua. Lots of things described here. Pre-cache. This does the sounds and particles that you want to load in ahead of time. You see lots of like little values here. Mana cost, ability cooldown, yada yada yada. These ability specials right here. What this is they are static values that are associated with the ability that are not going to change at any point. The game gets to know what these values are right away, and it can know with confidence that those are the value. For example, time walks. Your movement speed during time walk is always going to be 3,000. Nothing in the game affects or changes that. If you're time walking, you're moving 3,000 units, or 3,000 movement speed. The key thing about a data-driven ability is that you get to like flag lots of events and do lots of the things in the text file, and this is one of the biggest examples of it. This on spell start. This basically means anything that happens inside of here happens when the spell begins. The next thing to look at is this run script. It's how we mentioned Lua files are tied into data-driven abilities before. You give it the name of the script file, the name of the function you want to run, and there are lots of other things you can pass that to. Like there are things that you can just define with some values that you could list anywhere in the abilities file will be fine. Like point. Like you could say this spell is targeted by a point. That's just point. What is it? The engine knows what that is. Or the sound cast. This is Hero Faces Void's Time Walk. That's the Time Walk sound built into the game. You didn't have to give a file name for that like here. You can just write that down. While there are some particles you did have to give a file name for, and then there are also some values that if you want to access in the function of the code, you have to list here in run script. Okay, and then finally the last part of that I'm going to talk about in the abilities custom file for data-driven abilities are the modifiers. It's just like it sounds. These are buffs, debuffs, whatever, that are affecting some target, and you can describe how they work here. For example, there's a modifier that they use a modifier to keep track of the damage you've taken as Faceless Void over the past few seconds, because you want to undo that, when when you time walk. And the way it's handled is it's just like these events that you can run. It's got values you can set, and it's also got like events you can flag. So like the damage counter is passive. You don't have to press anything to get it to happen. It's hidden. You don't see it. It's considered a buff. You can't purge it. And also, it's got a flagged event similar to this on spell start. This modifier can have when the owner of the buff takes damage, this happens, which is this run script, and it passes in how much damage the target's just taken. So you see that, and there's like a time walk slow, how much it slows people who were near the time walk. the buff the user gets from when it occurs, yada yada yada, and you can describe all these things. You can describe some static values, like these properties. You will get a grip for how this works as you look at examples of code that do what you want to do. And now to briefly look at the Lua file for how this ties in. So, for example, if you wanted to think, well, the way my thing is going to work is when the spell starts, it's going to run this function called time walk in hero faceless void Lua. So we go there and we look at what this is. We look at the function time walk. Keys represents a set of values that describe the spell, and some of the keys, like caster, ability, etc., are caked into the spell or built in. You never had to define caster or ability anywhere. Those abilities always have those values that you can access. While at the same time, you can also add some new values that if you want to access in the code but aren't necessarily baked in. Like, for example, these modifiers that we define down here were also added here. Modifier caster, modifier slow, modifier buff. So that in this code, you can access caster, slow, buff. And you'll see later on that, like, the slow, for example, is used. If I hover over this, it is used here at the point of the time walk where it's slowing the enemies. Things to mention here, if this is basically explaining functions in Lua, which there is no overarching way to do that. It's just a lot of very small specific things. So you can see, like, here's an example where it emits a sound. It plays the sound of the Chronosphere sound cast at the caster, play some particles, do some damage. You can follow through this yourself. Oops, I accidentally left this. There. I left it there. You could follow through this yourself, see how this works, but there are like some functions like apply a data-driven modifier, create a timer, set something at the absolute origin of the caster. The whole point is that if you want to learn what functions do what and how to approach something, just look at someone else's code that does it before and then reapply it. So the reason I had this deleted was, for example, let's say we were writing the part of code where we wanted to slow some enemies. And you think, so how does a slow on time walk work? Well, the first thing it slows all the enemies around you. So I guess the first thing you'd have to do that is look at all the enemies. What are the enemies around you? And you think, well, shoot, I don't know how to get all the enemies around a unit in a Lua script code. Now, I could go digging through that ugly ass website I mentioned before, but an easier way would be to find a piece of code that does that already. And real quick, think of it, a hero that has a spell that has to look at a bunch of units around it, basically any AoE spell. And here's an example would be Sven's Stormbolt. So there's a part, Stormbolt stuns anything in an AoE or on the target it hits. So right here, you see find enemies in the area effect area. It's find units in radius. So you go, aha, this is what I needed. You copy that bad boy, plagiarize the shit out of freaking Fire Toad. You just paste it in, do what you want to do. Okay. So you see how that works, and there are other coding concepts like timers, yada yada yada. You get it, and it's just not something It's a bunch of specifics I couldn't explain in a video. It's hard to find a balance between covering everything, not rambling too much, but still, yeah. All right. So you see how this goes from text file to integrating the Lua file here. The last thing to mention is that was a really obvious cut, wasn't it? Is Lua abilities. Now, if you look at the Lua ability, you're going to notice, that's really similar. That's really similar to the data-driven ability. It's got a little spell start. It's got some modifiers. What's the damn point? Why would I want to do this? Because ability Lua lets you, if you do an ability Lua as opposed to a data-driven ability, this lets you, as I was mentioning before, override caked-in functions to the ability. To where it's like, I'll give you an example of why I did this. This was something I kind of wrote up for Chronosphere as a proof of concept to show the Fire Toad, like, would you want something like this? And basically what it was is that, how Chronosphere has got, the size changes depending on how much mana you spend? Well, as it is now, you don't see the AoE for that, right? Like when you click the cast the spell, and you have your mouse is hovering over the spot where you want to cast it, haven't clicked yet. With most AoE spells, you see a radius. With Chronosphere that is now, you don't get to see that. And the reason that is because of the data-driven ability, you can't change the radius on the fly. You've just got to set it right away, and then you're done. But with ability Lua, since you can overwrite the get this spell's AoE radius function, you can do that. And I'll show you how that's done. So, base class and not data driven, ability Lua, and you actually have to, on top of that, give it a script file. And since this hasn't been done with really any, maybe it's been done, I don't know. You can hear the game in the background. Maybe it's been done, but I put this in the modifier folder and called it IMBA Faceless Void Chronosphere. And I'll show you that. See, look, vscripts, modify. You can put this as it. You can put it whatever you want as long as it's somewhere in vscripts. Um, this it is .lua. I guess you don't have to include .lua in that part of it. So here it is. To show you what's so special about this is right here. Is get AoE radius is a function that like any spell with a defined radius has got. Normally, I'm not allowed to touch that. If it was data driven, I couldn't write a function that did that. At least I don't believe so. And I couldn't like make my own get AoE radius spell and tell the game to do that when it's painting the spell. I'd have to rewrite that all on my own. But this allows me to inject my code and to get AoE radius. So what I do is, I get the radius and then I calculate it based on the mana that was spent on my own here. And does it work? Well,
Road to oblivion.
here's a faceless void. Let's get rid of all of his octarines.
I go.
Oh look, Chronosphere with a radius. Well, yeah, you say, but normal Chronosphere and vanilla Dota's got that. That improved nothing. Let's just pick up some octarine cores and oh, so much bigger.
It
Look
shall
at that.
be.
Look at that. See? You could not have done that without data-driven by using a
My
data-driven
path
ability.
unspooled.
And all I had to do was break everything about the spell in the process. If I were just to did I use the spell? Did nothing happen? Did no sound play?
The march
Whatever.
of time.
It it has the correct radius. Okay, so there you go. That is my way overhead summary of how to do a custom hero in Dota IMBA, which, as I said, is really how to write custom abilities for Dota IMBA. The hero part is easy. There were a lot of things I didn't cover, but hopefully I've given you the tools on how to figure that out. Feel free to ask me on Reddit, comment on this video, whatever questions that you might have. But really, doing this well will be getting good at learning this stuff yourself. So, whew, I'm sure you can see this. My energy enthusiasm for this video is drained as this little timer in the bottom right corner of the screen is ticked on. Whatever. Hope it helped. Thanks so much. Talk to you later. Bye bye.